All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good friend Jeff Biggers. Jeff is a historian, a journalist, an author, and he is also, in fact, a playwright whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, Salon. He is the author of several books, including State Out of the Union and the United States of Appalachia. All of his work you can find at jeffbiggers.com and on Twitter at JeffRBiggers. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, so Jeff, as I said in the introduction, I mean, mostly when you've been on the show before, we've talked about history, we've talked about books, but you are in fact now a playwright, a published playwright. I know you have pretty much a deep history in doing performance pieces, monologues and stuff, but you just published a play called Damnatio Memoriae. I hope I'm saying it right, but Damnatio Memoriae. I guess let's just start out. What does those two words actually mean?
Yeah, it's funny to try to promote a book that's in Latin, but in fact, it's really I think something very familiar to us. Damnatio Memoriae really means to damn the memory, and it refers to an ancient Roman edict that gave the emperors the right to completely delete and destroy and eliminate someone's history or presence if they found it objectionable. An emperor, if he didn't like another emperor or someone who had challenged his power, would destroy their statues, melt their coins, completely erase them from any monuments and any kind of documents, and eliminate them from any kind of presence. Literally, it'd be like blocking and deleting someone on Facebook. And this kind of ancient edict really affected me because as a historian who spent years looking at how we have to recover lost histories and hidden histories, I felt like there was a lot of meaning to Damnatio Memoriae, some kind of condemning or condemnation of history, in fact, today.
And it's not even just the condemning; it's just the completely wiping away of history. And like, obviously, we can get to like modern stuff in a little bit about, and even what it means in Syria today, what it means in the United States, because this is actually something that happens globally here. But let's begin and kind of dig into the actual plot of the play itself. So, what actually tell us about the actual plot?
Well, just a step one step backwards. Why did I go to the stage in the first place instead of writing another investigative book on news that's happening in the Mediterranean with the migration crisis? I felt like, Matthew, that we needed a sense of humanity. We needed to give names. We needed to actually present human lives that are affected today by an incredible issue that's not only affecting the Mediterranean, but all of us in the United States and around the world, and that's the issue of global migration. I've been working with a theater in Bologna for many years, and we've been talking actually for several years about pursuing some sort of theatrical production that dealt with immigrants and migration. And instead of sort of looking at a completely contemporary issue, I felt like as a historian I needed to go back, especially in Italy, especially in ancient Rome, and see what the history was about ancient migration. And that's what led us to Damnatio Memoriae, that in fact, 2,000 years ago, there was a Roman emperor named Septimius Severus, who in fact was from Libya, and who had married his empress was from Syria. It's two of the sort of launching points of much of the migration today, from North Africa and, of course, from the Middle East. And this family, this Severus dynasty, really defined and changed the Roman Empire as we know it today in many respects. And I thought, wow, this is a part of history that we completely have forgotten. We effectively have condemned from our memory that we need to recover and understand, in fact, the ancient tradition of migration and how it has shaped the Roman Empire, how it shaped today's Europe, and how it even has shaped our own lives in the United States.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much I just, strictly speaking, as a North American white dude, like how little Honestly, I went to Catholic school, so I got a horrible education. My education was horrible, but just the history of the Roman Empire and how much we probably don't even understand in the U.S. and how much has been wiped away. How many their deep connection to Africa and what you explore in the play, and how much of it was so deeply seeped in Africa. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Right. You know, I think today we often see the headlines of this incredible issue of refugees and migrants pouring, of course, into Sicily and then up through Italy. And then, of course, now we're seeing it through Serbia and Slovenia and Croatia and going through Hungary. And I think we see this as some kind of as a recent phenomenon, when in fact the cycles of migration have been going on for centuries, especially when we go through various crises. I think what we're dealing with now, of course, is just the beginning of what's a complete shift in migratory patterns. And that is largely thanks to a climate situation. You know, obviously the war in Syria has many different factors, but one of the defining factors that we often overlook about the war in Syria is the issue of long-term drought and climate destabilization that in fact shifted 1 million people into the cities and led to all sorts of chaos and destabilization. That in fact so many of the migrants and refugees coming from Africa, it's not just because of poor economic yields and agricultural yields and inability to make a life, but likewise there you're dealing with major global climate issues that are forcing people to have to leave. And so instead of seeing that as somehow a problem, I wanted to go back in history and see in fact how the same cycles of migration in fact have been seen as opportunities, have been incredible contributors, have really done a lot to help shape and change us in a way that's been very beneficial. And in the perspective, for example, of African history in ancient Rome, I stumbled on to many things that, once again, were very fascinating to me. That, for example, one of the greatest writers ever in Latin was Apuleius, who came from Algeria, who becomes a part of the play. That some of the greatest poets and prefects and governors, and in fact, emperors, came out of northern Africa and the Middle East. That in fact, you know, if we look at the bigger picture of ancient Rome, it was a very inclusive and a very international realm that in fact had an incredible impact on the rest of the world.